Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into a really provocative argument about parenting, pulled straight from our source material. And the main idea is pretty controversial, that a parent's number one job is to make their children likable. All right, so let's jump right in, where the author does with a scene you've probably witnessed, maybe more times than you'd like to admit, a kid having a total meltdown in public, and the parents, well, not doing much about it. So the source kicks things off with this image. A toddler just screaming his head off in an airport. And the author's point isn't that the kid is tired or overwhelmed. No, the argument is that this is a performance, a deliberate tool to get attention. And the real kicker, according to the text, is that a parent who truly cares wouldn't let their child become the object of an entire crowd's silent judgment. And it's not just a one-off thing. The author lays out a pattern. You've got the toddler who's never been told no, so he has to be watched like a hawk every second, which, ironically, means he has no freedom at all. Or the kids who completely take over an adult dinner party. And then there's the story of a boy who whacks the author's daughter with a toy truck, and his mom comforts him. For the author, these are all symptoms of the same problem, a lack of clear, decisive parenting. Okay, so if that's the problem, what's the solution? Well, the author boils it all down to one single, very powerful, and, pretty controversial rule. And there it is, the core idea. The author argues that your own gut reaction, that feeling of genuine dislike for your child's behavior, is the most important social compass they have. I mean, think about it. If you, the person who is biologically programmed to love this kid unconditionally, finds their behavior annoying, what is the rest of the world going to think? That feeling is a huge red flag. But wait a minute, that sounds totally backwards, right? How could focusing on your own negative feelings possibly lead to a good outcome for your kid? Well, to get the logic here, we first have to unpack a very popular idea about kids that the author thinks is just plain wrong. See, the source claims that a really common parenting mistake comes from a specific philosophical idea about what children, and all people really, are like at their core. This is the idea of the noble savage from the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau. It's the belief that kids are born perfect little angels, these unsullied spirits, and it's society, with all its rules and structures, that messes them up. But the text basically says, nope. It calls this a dangerously romantic idea that has no basis in reality. In fact, the author flips that idea completely on its head. The argument is that aggression is our natural default setting. Peace, that's the real achievement. It's something we have to learn. And to back this up, the text looks at things like primate behavior and human history, suggesting that it's our social rules that actually tame our aggressive instincts. And check out these numbers, because they're pretty startling. In the modern UK, the homicide rate is about 1 per 100,000 people. For the Kung hunter-gatherers, a group often held up as peaceful, it was 40. And the Caddo people in the 1840s, a mind-blowing 1450. The author's point is crystal clear. Bigger, more organized societies are way, way less violent. Which brings us to this number. 2. So what's the most violent age for a human being, statistically speaking? Yep. 2 years old. 2-year-olds are, according to the source, the most violent people on Earth. They hit, they kick, they bite, they steal toys. The point is, aggression is already there. It doesn't need to be taught. It needs to be socialized out of us. Okay, so if kids aren't these perfect little angels and actually need to be taught how to be peaceful, how are parents supposed to do it? Let's get into the how-to part of the argument. The author shares a personal story to show how this all works in practice. His toddler son had started this dinner table rebellion. He'd grab the spoon, eat a couple of bites, and then just start playing with his food. Nobody was getting enough food, nobody was getting enough sleep, and the whole house was just grumpy. As he puts it, the trajectory wasn't good. So armed with this mindset, the author decided it was time for what he calls a high-noon showdown at the dinner table. He knew that as a patient adult, he could outlast a 2-year-old. For a toddler, 30 minutes feels like an eternity. He was not going to lose a battle of wills. So here's the play-by-play. Dad takes back the spoon, the son clamps his mouth shut. So Dad just starts gently poking his son's shoulder over and over until the kid gets annoyed and opens his mouth to protest, and boom, the spoon goes in. The second he swallows, he gets tons of praise. After an hour of this, the son finally eats a full meal. They take a nap. And here's the absolute kicker. The author says his son seemed to like him more after the battle, not less. And this whole story leads to a really important distinction the author makes about the role of a parent, a role he thinks has gotten seriously confused in modern times. The source argues that so many parents today are just terrified of their kids not liking them. They try to be a friend first. But a kid is going to have dozens of friends in their life. They only get two parents. A friend wants to be liked. A parent's job, on the other hand, is to be a representative of the real world. They're the ones who have to teach the rules, even if it means being unpopular for a little while. So, being willing to be the bad guy for a minute isn't being mean. According to this author, it's one of the most responsible and caring things you can do. It's about being strong enough to handle a little bit of temporary anger for their huge long-term benefit. So what's the end game here? What are the long-term results of these two different approaches? What's the ultimate payoff for being willing to be disliked in the moment? Well, the text paints a pretty sad picture of the child who isn't socialized properly. The author calls them uncarved blocks, just sort of vague and unfocused. Other kids don't want to play with them because they don't know how to share or take turns. Adults find them annoying, and that lack of positive attention just creates this vicious cycle where they don't get the feedback they need to grow. When you think about it, the author's argument is that a parent is basically a translator for society. The big rules, the laws, are written down. But all the little unwritten rules, how to play fair, how to share, how to be a person other people actually want to hang out with, that's what parents are supposed to teach. And that's the real takeaway from the source material. Good discipline isn't about punishment. It's about giving your kid the social skills they need to succeed. A child who knows the rules, who can share and control their temper, is a child that other kids want to play with. They get invited back. They get positive reinforcement. And that, the author argues, is how a child truly becomes liked. So we'll leave it there with this final, challenging thought from the source material. Is the kindest thing you can do for your child not to avoid conflict, but to be brave enough to create it when necessary, knowing it's what will help them in the long run?